Hello, welcome to yet another episode of Beyond the Present podcast. My name is Daniel Mulligan, and I'm here joined live from Canada by Poujix. That's right. Hey there, my man. How's it going?
Life is awesome, man. How are you?
I am doing terrific. And, of course, we have Kenny back for yet another great episode. Hey there, Kenny, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back.
It's a pleasure. And I heard that you're actually on your way to drop your basically brother at the airport and stuff. So what's the issue? Is it for New Year's holidays and stuff?
Oh yeah, actually he's going to surprise his wife. She is due, I think, around in 3 or 4 days. And
are you kidding me? Oh
yeah,
my!
Yeah. So she did like when he came here. She knew that he's not going to be there when she's due, but he made the plan last minute, and he's going to go there and surprise her.
Wow, dude, I love surprise plans. Holy, he's going to get some brownies for that surprise. I'm pretty sure that's very good for him. Fabulous, and I wish him the best. So hopefully we're going to see what's going to come afterwards, and if something happened, please let us know about the stories and what transpired.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe a whole new movie scenario will be created as a result of this amazing experience. So it's wonderful. What now I want to talk about is the topic today, which is somehow different than surprising your partners. Of course, we love that, but this is a very different issue, and that is the concept of education. So, Kenny, I heard that you have majored in education, actually.
Yeah, so I'm actually doing my master's in teaching, so a lot of concepts around education and 21st century education. That's what I've learned. I just started this past September, so it's been 4 months in, and I've learned a lot in these 4 months. And I've also got to experiment that in a classroom environment. One
question, what exactly is the field of education? I mean, like, you guys learn how to teach others, or there's a lot more than that?
Essentially, in this field, there's, for my specific program, it entails teaching. And when I say teaching, it's about teaching students, so it's up to grade 12. But you can also combine a PhD in education if you want to, and then you can further go into the education field. And in that case, if you go down that path, then you would be inclined with or working with the university or higher education.
Fantastic.
Not school education, but higher, yeah.
But why exactly you picked this field of studies? Because that's, from my perspective, a very difficult field. And of course, it requires you to really love what you're studying. So why you picked this field out of all the others?
It's first of all, when I was in, like, I did an undergraduate degree in computer science, and I was in the industry working for 2 years, and I just found something missing. And I think while the work was good and it did pay me well, I think the rewarding factor wasn't there for me. And teaching is something I've done throughout my undergrad. So I was a teaching assistant, so I had exposure to working with kids, be it tutoring one-on-one or in a class of 20 to 25 students. And that was something that I always found, I always had a sense of enjoyment whenever I got to teach. And that was a main driving force for me to make that move and move into an actual field where I can now have a license, and that makes me, equipped to teach students. And again, I'm aligned with teaching what I've done in my undergrad. So my teachables, for example, would be math and computer science, because that's what my expertise is in.
Fantastic. Of course, education is not a field that is unfamiliar to Poujix. As far as I know, Poujix, you're also basically engaged with tutoring and education. You're an astrophysicist. You probably will have a lot of teaching experience, in the future. So what is your perspective regarding the concept of education and teaching?
Oh, yeah. So like Kenny mentioned, I really always loved the notion of explaining stuff to people and helping them understand something they didn't, or at least my point of view on that. Parts of the reason I joined you to start this podcast was the same thing, honestly. Obviously other reasons too, but I love to express opinions and gain opinions, and just that exchange is wonderful. And in my personal tutoring one-on-one especially experience, I found that it's not just me teaching those students and those kids, or mostly high school kids, something they actually do teach me a lot, and I get to be in contact with the future generation, whether help them to build a better future for themselves, but at the same time learn how they think, how they what they want, or how they see the world, which is I think very, very interesting and probably even necessary for me.
Wow. And, not long ago, I was reading an article about why people choose different professions. And it was like mentioned, the guy who loves money chooses business, the guy who loves power chooses politics, the guy who loves, for example, details chooses engineering. And generally, it was pretty amazing for me. Like the people who chose teaching and being a professor oftentimes were attributed to loving learning and trying to expand their knowledge and growing. So I want to ask you right now, you both show tremendous interest in learning and expanding your knowledge and abilities. So I don't think that you guys are teaching just for the sake of teaching others, but you also enjoy this process and you learn from it. I mean, you just mentioned right now, Poujix, you actually learn from your own students. How is that, by the way, possible to learn from your own students? Because when you're working, let's say you're teaching these guys mathematics or physics or whatever, how can you learn while teaching?
Well, that's right. So one of the things I think it's especially with younger students is very obvious is that as we get older, we get very set in our own ways, and we have some a relatively more rigid view of the world. But the student's sense of curiosity, sense of wanting to know and create that sort of rigid thing that we already created reminds me of how certain this whole thing is, and you can really easily come and reevaluate it and go rebuild it, or at least rebuild parts of it that you think might not be as compatible as you thought.
Wow.
So that is obviously with younger students, that is the most interesting thing that I get out of it. And well, it's very easy. But it's very easy to forget it unless you're in constant contact with it. There's just one example of such a thing, but these interactions are never fruitless.
That's so true. And Kenny, back to you. You yourself, I'm pretty sure you've had a lot of teaching experience up until now with being a teacher assistant and all that stuff. So how do you think teaching has actually changed and affect your, basically, mindset? Because you have obviously changed in the process of teaching others and trying to expand their knowledge. And you mentioned earlier that the reward that you felt and sensed from teaching was not comparable to that of which you acquired in the corporate Canada, for example, working for companies. So what is that exact reward you're talking about? Why is it that field seems to be so much fulfilling when you compare it to, let's say, working in a company or in corporate, let's say, America or whatever it is? Why is that so fulfilling for you?
I think it really comes down to the foundations of different concepts as students learn. For example, in math, when you learn how to add numbers or you learn how to multiply numbers, now that's a very fundamental concept, but it's the applications of that concept is used in our day-to-day lives when we go for shopping, when we have to fill gas, when we have to buy furniture for the house. These things are real-time applications. And one thing that is more interesting for me is to help the student build their own knowledge when you teach them a new concept. The idea is not to tell them 2 times 2 is 4 and you should memorize it, but help them in that meaning-making process. And each student would be building their own meaning, but the benefit of that is that meaning is going to stay with them as they move in higher grades and even the professions that they pick in their own lives.
Wow, that's a good point. And of course, as you can, see around us, people generally, especially the younger ones, don't have a very good attitude towards education. Because let's be honest, education is something that is done unto them since a very young age. It's like almost forced upon them. And they look into the whole notion of education as something that they have to get rid of as soon as possible and never get back to. And we know that's no longer the case. We live in the age of information where we have to be constant learners. So a lot of us around, just take a look around you right now. A lot of us, we have lost that passion, that zest for learning and for education. Whereas if you somehow find some solutions that we can actually implement in society, this might improve the overall quality of our lifestyles by knowing how to learn new stuff and then apply them to our lives and businesses. So Poujix, why do you think that zest and passion towards education and learning is on a decline these days? And more importantly, what can be done about it?
Well, I clearly sense it as the same way you say it's in decline. But although I have no idea if it's actually factually correct, like if we actually done studies to suggest that, I don't know about that. and frankly, I don't really care. So parts of the reason, if that's true, parts of the reason that it can be is because of what you mentioned. It's mainly forced onto people, and that's never encouraging unless you actually love every aspect of that thing. So in my personal experience with individual students, I try to appeal to their sense of curiosity. So I first get to know my students, see what ticks them, what makes them, what are they interested in the most, because all the young students, at least, well, probably all the students, have one or two areas that are very obviously encouraging to them. They really like it, appreciate it. So I try to connect whatever I'm teaching to them to those things that they like. Let it be, for example, if that's soccer, I try to draw analogies from that field with the subject that I'm teaching them, and that helps quite a lot, and actually makes them more interested in that field because they feel it's not as foreign and as weird as they thought it would be, or unpleasant as they thought it would be.
Interesting. So how about you, Kenny? You're an expert in this field. What's the reason behind this decline? And in your studies, is it actually proven that this is on decline, or is this just something that we sense and feel around us? And more importantly, could there be any way to boost that passion and zest among learners to change their perspective towards the whole notion of education and to make them more inspired and excited to actually study, to learn, and to grow?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that's the dilemma of a lot of educators, a lot of parents, a lot of people. Essentially, it boils down to a lot of things. For example, if you go to U of T, which is University of Toronto, and if you're a graduate student from that university, then automatically the employers would have a different set of expectations from you, whereas to say you go to a different university because of the ranking that is in place. Now, just having that system or that framework in place does not necessarily mean the students would be following that or would be within the boundaries. You might find somebody who's just an average coming out of University of Toronto, whereas somebody else is expecting them to be, like a brilliant or a smart student. What my point here is that the systems or the frameworks that we have in place, they are coming in from like a lot of years ago when we had industrialization, and a lot of these things are what's being used even in schools, high schools, the way students are tested, the way they are marked, the way they're graded. All of that is really a result of the industrialization, and little effort has been made into changing the way we assess our students. One thing that I learned I have learned in my teaching degree is that the importance of inquiry teaching. The idea is that you're teaching as an inquiry. So that facilitates the meaning-making process that I mentioned earlier, where students are not just shown information, but they're given the tools, and the teacher acts as a facilitator. And it's a guided inquiry where the teacher guides the student, and it facilitates the student asking the right questions. And even if they ask a question which is way off the topic, the teacher can use that as an opportunity, because that could be a misconception, that could be a wrong understanding of the concept, and it can use that as an opportunity to further aid the inquiry within the student. Now, inquiry itself, in general, is something that a lot of policymakers are not in sync with, because they were not taught that way. So, for example, the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, he does not believe in the discovery process, which is the idea of inquiry, when you're teaching mathematics. But research has shown that students who are involved in inquiry, they do end up retaining information better over longer periods of time. And then the other benefit of that is they actually develop an interest, because they're not given a set of rules to follow.
Interesting.
They're building their own knowledge, and the teacher's there to guide them. And then this can be in the process of, where instead of having a final exam out of, say, 100 marks,
that's right.
In high school, you can have a project where everyone is working together. The benefit of that is it's facilitating interpersonal skills. So they're building on the teamwork skills, they're building on problem solving, they're building on conflict resolution, in addition to actually doing the problem.
These are all great,
Right, so-
but I'm going to ask you right now one question because I have another criticism of the current education system right now, and that is the fact that I don't know why, but I have this feeling that especially like when it comes to like K-12 education or like undergraduate, we have this huge focus on two types of intelligences, which are linguistic and mathematical logical. But as we know, that we have 7 different types of intelligences that are not discussed so much in the field of education. I mean, a lot of us think of like a lot of those people who are geniuses in other types of intelligences, let's say musical or bodily kinesthetic or perhaps interpersonal intelligence, intrapersonal intelligence, and many other fields of intelligence. So why do you think the current field of education only exploits the 2 major types, which are linguistic and mathematical logical, and ignores all the others? And more importantly, what could this field do to actually exploit all of that geniuses and talents of the people who might not be very talented linguistically or mathematically, but might have other types of intelligence that could be used to make the society a lot better?
I think I would beg to defer on your point there in terms of that people are not following what they like doing. I would talk more from at least an Ontario point of view, where there are tools in place where when students go to high school, they pick what they want. They're not being forced what to pick. Their parents are not telling them what to pick. They themselves are making the choice. So somebody who wants to pursue in the field of engineering or computer science would be picking mathematics, obviously, or computer studies in high school. Versus somebody who's has an interest in music or arts, for example, you can go to an art school. In addition to the subjects, the main focus of that school would be primarily on arts programs or things like drama, visual theater. There's a lot of programs in Toronto. I can talk about Toronto because I've known about the school since I started my degree, and I've seen also students in the school that I went to where they had a clear notion and understanding of what they want to do. So not everyone in the school, in my class that I was teaching, not everyone were going to go in engineering or mathematics. They knew what they were interested in, and their parents, in the parent-teacher interviews, they also knew what their students wanted.
So you're saying if somebody does not have any, for example, intelligence, mathematically or linguistically, can he just skip all of these things and just focus? Let's say, I don't know, is there such thing as like a, let's say, sports school where they just focus on athleticism?
Yeah. So there's a school in Scarborough called Birchmount Collegiate Institute where it's an athletics program. So students are there, they're studying, but the main focus is athletics. So they're given more opportunities, there's better equipment, there's more places where you can compete, and there's better trainers who can help you get where you want to be.
Interesting. So you're saying that currently, with the current system, people are now being allowed to use and exploit their true intelligences, even if that's not a typical linguistic or mathematical intelligence.
So, in my opinion, yes. And I think where your question comes, it really boils down to the global education field, because coming from India, I remember I didn't have a lot of options given to me. I was pretty much forced to pick what I wanted to. And then my parents didn't give me a lot of plethora of options. And there's a distinct difference in the education in Canada because students here are given the choice and the option to pick what they want. And, they're making those decisions early on in high school. So later on when they have to go to university, they're more well equipped. So no wonder you find people in university who are, changing their minds because they've done that in high school. They have the flexibility. They have they would not be hesitant to change their degrees based on what their interests are.
But one quick question, because you mentioned, originally you graduated from high school in India. So a lot of us, we know, a lot of whiz kids and geniuses from India and China who are now literally swarming the headquarters of, let's say, Ivy League universities and whatnot. So do you yourself, since you are now an expert in education, and you yourself have passed your high school with courses that were forced upon you, aren't you somehow satisfied with the fact that you were forced to take those courses? Or if you went back through time, you would have actually changed your approach? If you had the option of not, for example, being forced to study mathematics, wouldn't you have done it? Or you would have perhaps changed your philosophy overall and changed your approach?
I don't think so, because math has played a very important role in my life, and I've had an understanding and a very deep liking for the subject and, the discoveries and whatnot since, as far as I can remember, since grade 7, 8. and that has always kept me interested in mathematics. Now, obviously, I knew mathematics is not going to lead me to a lot of jobs, so hence I picked computer science that goes with it. And I also like computer science because computer science builds a lot of mathematics, and the foundation of mathematics is required, even if you're in AI or machine learning, because those two fields are very intersectional. But for me, I think I've always wanted to go down the path of math, just because when I say forced upon back in India, I think that's the common norm. So you find a lot of students who go to engineering and then they just do a complete pivot and they go for an MBA and now they're in business. My point there is that, okay, why would you go do an engineering when you wanted to end up in business? And you find a lot of students like that where they just do engineering because like there's a few options to pick from, but later they're like, okay, like business skills are important, so let's just do an MBA. Essentially that engineering background is not that useful once you're in the MBA field.
Interesting. That's right. I got your point. Let me go back to Poujix here for a second and to ask about his opinion regarding the matter and the efficiency of forced systems versus systems that allow you to actually change your courses and focus on your own intelligences. So, Poujix, what's your perspective?
Well, Kenny knows better about education systems, at least in here, so I take his word for it. And it's obviously true that you have more options, say in Canada here, than a lot of other places. But ultimately, I think one of the forces coming is not actually through lack of option there, but rather what you're able to do in the future. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if you pursue art, your options are very much limited in terms of making your living throughout your adulthood. So a lot of people might love to go do art, but not do it because they're uncertain about the future. And I think that's a very much more systematic problem, not narrowed down to education, that we have to solve, because these people obviously have talents that we can actually tap into and use to advance our civilizations as we did in the past.
That's right.
And we are still doing it, but not to the degree that we can do, I suppose. We can have more efficiency in all these areas. I personally am a person of mathematics, and obviously I'm doing astrophysics. So I don't have a problem with going after these logical areas, but I think a lot of people would rather pursue something else that are forced to, again, either by lack of option in their youth or lack of opportunities in their futures that they're concerned with.
Interesting. And in Beyond the Present podcast, in addition to STEM, we're also concerned with the concept of futurism. So I want to move on to you right now, Kenny, and ask you about your perspective regarding the future of education. Because let's be honest, things are changing. The classrooms are changing. People are now using phones to use almost everything, find all information. And we have this technology changing all of it. So as an expert in the field of education, what is your perspective regarding the future of education, and how do you think our future classrooms might be different than these classrooms today, and whether or not we might actually have a complete revolution where classrooms might even disappear and teachers will no longer be necessary? So what is your perspective regarding the future of education in the coming decades?
I think being in the 21st century, there's a lot of decisions to make, and that goes for not just for the teachers, but also for the policymakers who enforce the policies in the different school boards all across the world. And one of the key realizations in the 21st century, at least, is the use of media, because media literacy is playing a very key role, and we are bombarded with information all across the internet, for example, but also that do lead us into our classrooms. And when we do see a distinct difference between what we are doing outside of classroom and what we're doing inside of classroom, that's a very big reason why people would not be interested in the classroom. Mm-hmm. Now, one reason for that obviously is that, okay, I'm just doing a lot of cool stuff outside, and when I come to class, it gets boring. And it's very natural for somebody to just look at it from that point of view and be like, okay, I'm not interested in this. And I think it's a very natural human instinct to be in that or to fall in that category. And And the way that this can be easily tackled is by including in your curriculum things which are making use of smartphones, making use of people using that for actually learning something about. And this has been done. People are doing it. Classroom teachers, at least in Toronto, there's a phone use policy, so
Wow.
students are not. It's not prohibited that you can't use phone unless it's. There could be some teachers who explicitly say that I don't want you to use it, but the school policy is that you cannot take away the phones from the students because they have the right to it. Now, if they have the right to it, why not build a curriculum where they are actually using it for educational purposes?
Interesting.
There's a lot of classes that uses laptops. A lot of classes that and you can see a distinct enthusiasm and charisma on the students' faces the moment they know they're using tablets or laptops. Now, if you see that and it's a lot of it is because of the century that we are in, 21st century, and there's so much of intersection going on. The key idea is to make things cross-curricular. You can't just think of math as math.
That's right.
You have to think about math in sync with physics. You have to think about math in sync with geography. Like population density, that involves math. When we're looking at different geographical areas, we talk about population density, but that you're playing with the numbers, and that's where the intersection of these two things are coming in. Now you can take it local, and you can talk about the population density in your own local neighborhood, and then you can now create a project using a software on your laptop. So this is a lot of cross-curricular things going on, and then you can incorporate other things that you can have a self-reflection component where students are now writing about it. So that's building their literacy.
Wow.
They can have conversations about it. They can have debates around what they think, because people have their own decisions, and now facilitating that debates or oral discourse is very key in today's world, because you find so many people online on social media just voicing their opinions, thinking that that's they're just going to voice their opinions and that's about it. If somebody disagrees, then to help with them. They're not willing to actually have a discourse online, which I feel is the most. I think that's a side effect, because people just want to voice their opinion, but they're not willing to answer somebody who has a different opinion, because that's their voice and they're not willing to answer them back. I feel like the more we facilitate these kind of conversations in class, the better the students would be equipped, not just for whatever they want to, whatever fields they're interested in, but also, just be members of the 21st century, where they're involved with technology, where they're learning about new things on a day-to-day basis, and also making decisions that, as members of the society, making decisions that not just promote the wellness of an environment, but also promote an education field which is progressing, and also a field which is constantly evolving.
Wow, wonderful. And let me hear Poujix's perspective regarding the future of education.
Well, I don't want to build too much on that, but the fact that specifically with the social media and all those discussions and opinions, I think I couldn't agree more with Kenny. And I think one of the things that we haven't been taught, our generation and olders haven't been taught, because we were not expecting this environment of social media. It's all new to all of us. We don't know what to do with it. I think we have a better chance of educating the younger generations to do better. Well, ourselves too, but obviously younger generations are in the process of learning that opinions, you're free to your opinions, but you are also responsible for them. You have to own them. You have to be able to listen to other people's opinion at the same time as expressing yours and trying to negotiate what is a better opinion or not. So that's a very good thing too, that I hear hopefully being done more in the future, but it's encouraging that people are thinking about it.
That's wonderful. You have anything else to say?
I just want to quickly add on to that about opinions. One thing that is as a person, say, who has a PhD or somebody who's heavily focused in the research, anytime you say something, you would probably have done your research. The idea there is that your opinion is an informed opinion. It's not coming out of what you think. It's not a prejudice. It's not a bias. And I think one thing that with the idea of forming your own opinions, but also forming informed opinions, has a very bigger effect, because imagine if you have students who can do that, not just verbally but written, and that has such a tremendous impact, because tomorrow, if you want to write to your policymaker, you want them to reevaluate the policy that they've written, you can actually write a very persuading letter to your local councillor. and then they can actually take it forward. It's the idea of creating citizens that are working together, but also the idea is that it's not just about people who are in the higher education who need to know who need to have an informed opinion. In today's world, a lot of people think that only if you get a PhD you're considered smart, or you're considered what you
know your stuff. But that's not true from your perspective.
Exactly, because you can have a high school student, having the same, can have a discourse with a PhD student, and what if they're keeping up with each other, that's breaking all the stereotypes out there.
That is wonderful. So overall, the thing is this, now that we've talked about the issue of education in depth, unfortunately we're running out of time here, and I would like to actually wrap up this show about the concept, because we all understand the importance of education, and we know that without it there is no future, because that's the very foundation of future, which means learning and education becomes, for us at least here at the Beyond the Present podcast, a major priority. But with that being said, let's try to wrap up the show and reach a conclusion. So, Poujix, after all that we talked about the concept of education, what is now your final thought?
I'm very optimistic. This is one of the I'm an optimistic person in general, but this is one of the areas that I'm very optimistic. Although there are very things to be done and a lot of progress to be made, of course. But when it comes to younger generation, it just means opportunity, and that's amazing. We just have to not screw it up and let it take on. And I'm excited.
Fantastic. And Kenny, as the expert, what is your final comment?
I think education is a constantly evolving field, and as educators, it's very important for the educators to understand a critical role that they play in this equation, and how they can be as an educator as well, just not just take what is given to you, but constantly evaluate what you're doing. And also, if anytime you see some differences that you think are not right, you should always be ready to challenge your authority, because people who are the policymakers, they most often they don't. It's a common theme that they don't have, or they haven't done much research on their own on when they put forth policies that make no sense.
Fantastic.
Because that's what they think is right, but the educators in the field are clearly disagreeing with them. So it's very important for educators to make that change, and I feel even the students, and I feel we're going down that path. And I would just like to say that anytime during my time in the school, when I saw the smiles on the faces of the students when they figured a concept, that was the most rewarding experience for me.
Wow, you are truly a wonderful educator, and we are so glad to have you on board for this show to discuss the ins and outs of education. That's all the time we have for. Basically, I want to thank both of you, Poujix and Kenny, for your great time to be here with us.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. And for our listeners right now, do you know that you can actually leave your suggestions and have your topics discussed in Beyond the Present podcast? So right now, why don't you go ahead and leave your messages on our website, or simply contact the producer of the show, Puya LJ. You can actually reach him on Instagram, POUYALJ, basically on Instagram. You can actually reach him other places as well on Gmail. So leave him also some messages, some comments, some topics that you would like us to discuss in our future programs. And that's all the time we have for. My name is Daniel Mulligan, and this was Beyond the Present podcast. Thank you.